From a courthouse controversy that nearly shut down production to a future NFL legend's surprising acting debut, Bucktown holds secrets far stranger than its explosive plot. This blaxploitation classic starring Fred Williamson and Pam Grier wasn't just shot in Missouri. It featured an armored vehicle jailbreak, launched careers from a switchboard, and ended with a fight scene so brutal, audiences still debate it today. Fact 1. Carl Weathers' first credited role. Before Carl Weathers became world famous as Apollo Creed in Rocky, he made his first credited film appearance in Bucktown, playing a character named Hambone. This 1975 blaxploitation film served as the launching pad for one of Hollywood's most recognizable action stars, though few people realize it today. Weathers had just retired from professional football in 1974 after playing for the Oakland Raiders and the Canadian Football League's British Columbia Lions. He was transitioning into acting full-time and needed to build his resume. Director Arthur Marks cast Weathers in a supporting role alongside Fred Williamson and Pam Grier, giving him valuable screen time in a genre that was red hot at the box office. The film was shot in Kansas City, Missouri, and provided Weathers with his first opportunity to work on a major action production with established stars. What makes this casting particularly interesting is that Weathers appeared in another Arthur Marks film the same year called Friday Foster, also starring Pam Grier, where he played a character named Yarbrough. Both films came out in 1975, making it a breakthrough year for the aspiring actor. Just 1 year later, producers Irwin Winkler and Robert Chartoff saw something special in Weathers and cast him as Apollo Creed in Rocky, a role that was originally signed to real-life boxing legend Ken Norton. That casting decision changed everything for Weathers, who went on to reprise the role in 3 more Rocky films and became one of the most beloved characters in the franchise. Without his work in low-budget blaxploitation films like Bucktown, Weathers might never have gotten the chance to step into the ring with Sylvester Stallone and create movie history. Fact 2. Pam Grier started as a switchboard operator. Pam Grier's path to becoming the undisputed queen of blaxploitation cinema began in the most unlikely place, behind a switchboard at American International Pictures. After arriving in Los Angeles in 1967, Grier needed to support herself while taking acting classes, so she worked as a switchboard operator for a talent agency before moving to AIP, the studio that would eventually produce Bucktown and many of her most famous films. This wasn't just a job answering phones, it was her doorway into the film industry. Working at American International Pictures gave Grier direct access to the people making movies. And she had the courage to introduce herself to the company's leading director, the legendary Roger Corman. That bold move paid off when Corman began casting her in small roles in raunchy women-in-prison films shot in the Philippines, including The Big Dollhouse in 1971 and The Big Birdcage in 1972. These early exploitation films showcased Grier's commanding screen presence and physical confidence, leading to her breakout starring role in Coffee in 1973. By the time Bucktown was filmed in 1974 and released in 1975, Grier had become one of the biggest stars in the genre, yet she was working for the same studio where she once operated the switchboard. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved in the production. Film critic Roger Ebert later praised Grier's natural charisma and described her as having a kind of physical life missing from many other attractive actresses. Her journey from switchboard operator to action star remains one of Hollywood's most inspiring underdog stories, proving that sometimes the best way into the film industry is simply showing up and making connections. Fact 3. Fred Williamson's disastrous Monday Night Football stint. Fred Williamson, who starred as the tough and cool Duke Johnson in Bucktown, experienced one of the most embarrassing professional failures of his career just months before filming began. In 1974, ABC hired Williamson to replace Don Meredith as the color commentator on Monday Night Football, hoping his reputation for saying outrageous things and his stardom in blaxploitation films would widen the program's fan base. The network executives couldn't have been more wrong. Williamson's debut during the first preseason broadcasts was nothing short of disastrous. Instead of wearing the traditional wardrobe expected of network broadcasters, Williamson showed up in open-collared shirts and gaudy jewelry, looking more like his Superfly screen persona than a professional sports commentator. Critics said he looked more like a pimp than a broadcaster. The bigger problem was that Williamson had very little to say during the games, and when he did speak, his comments were often irrelevant to what was happening on the field. ABC quickly realized they had made a terrible mistake. Williamson was fired before the regular season even started and replaced by Alex Karras, the former Detroit Lions player who had appeared in the Mel Brooks comedy Blazing Saddles. Williamson earned the dubious distinction of becoming the first Monday Night Football broadcaster not to last an entire season. The highlight of his entire tenure was probably the introductory press conference where he joked that he was hired to bring some color to the booth. After this humiliating experience, Williamson returned to what he did best, making action films. Bucktown began filming in September of 1974, giving Williamson a chance to rebuild his reputation and prove he belonged in front of cameras, just not in a broadcast booth. Fact 4. Controversial courthouse filming without permission. The production of Bucktown nearly got shut down due to a major legal problem that arose during filming in Platte City, Missouri. The crew filmed scenes inside and around the Platte County Courthouse without obtaining proper permission from local authorities, a decision that infuriated presiding judge Henry J. Miller. When the judge discovered that a Hollywood production had been using public property to film what he suspected might be an immoral movie, he demanded action. According to reports published in Variety magazine on October 23, 1974, Judge Miller stated that if the movie turned out to be immoral, he didn't think it should be allowed to use public property for filming. He requested copies of the script so he could personally review the content and decide whether to allow further shooting on courthouse grounds. The judge gave his decision deadline as November 15, 1974, leaving the production in limbo. The scenes in question included a parking lot fight and a dramatic jailbreak sequence that used a breakaway wall. Fortunately for the filmmakers, shooting was eventually allowed to continue after the judge reviewed the material. The final film includes thank you credits to the people and officials of Platte City and Kansas City, Missouri, for their cooperation and assistance, suggesting the controversy was resolved amicably. This incident highlights the challenge that low-budget exploitation filmmakers faced when working in small towns that weren't accustomed to Hollywood productions. Local officials often viewed these films with suspicion, worried about how their communities would be portrayed. Today, you can still see the Platte County Courthouse in several scenes throughout Bucktown, serving as a time capsule of how the building looked in the mid-1970s before later renovations changed its appearance. Fact 5. A breakaway wall for the armored vehicles scene. One of the most outrageous and memorable sequences in Bucktown features an armored vehicle crashing through a wall during a dramatic jailbreak, and the production went to elaborate lengths to make this scene possible. According to newspaper reports from the Platte County Landmark published in October of 1974, the crew built a special breakaway wall just east of the Platte County Jail specifically for the armored vehicle to drive through during filming. This wasn't a simple prop. It required careful construction to ensure it would collapse realistically when struck, while also keeping the stunt safe for everyone involved. The scene itself has become notorious among fans of the film because it takes the action to an almost absurd level. Critics and viewers alike have pointed out that the sudden appearance of a military-grade armored vehicle in a small-town story strains credibility to the breaking point. Some reviewers noted that the film goes a little nutso when the armored vehicle is introduced, but audiences should just roll with it and enjoy the spectacle. The sequence raises obvious questions about logic, such as whether the Army would really fail to notice someone stealing one of their vehicles. But in the context of a blaxploitation action film made for just $600,000, realism took a backseat to excitement and visual spectacle. The breakaway wall and armored vehicle scene represent the kind of over-the-top action that defined the genre during its peak in the mid-1970s. Director Arthur Marks and his crew were determined to give audiences the biggest bang for their buck, even if it meant pushing the boundaries of plausibility. The scene remains one of the most talked about moments in the film, proving that sometimes the craziest ideas make the most lasting impressions on audiences. Fact 6. Bernie Hamilton's full circle career. Bernie Hamilton's role in Bucktown as the aging tough guy hardly created an unexpected connection that would come full circle 3 decades later. Hamilton delivered a memorable performance as an older football player who still had some moves left, providing both muscle and comic relief throughout the film. Just months after Bucktown was released in July of 1975, Hamilton was cast in what would become his most famous role. Captain Harold Doby on the hit television series Starsky and Hutch, which premiered that same year. The show ran from 1975 to 1979 and made Hamilton a household name as the by-the-book police captain who supervised the 2 hip plainclothes detectives. What makes this story even more interesting is that Hamilton almost didn't get the part. Producers Aaron Spelling and Leonard Goldberg initially cast a white actor to play Captain Doby, but they remembered Hamilton from a previous police captain role he had played in another Spelling-Goldberg production and decided he provided the right chemistry and balance for the show. The full circle moment came in 2004 when a big-budget comedy movie version of Starsky and Hutch was produced, and Fred Williamson, Hamilton's co-star from Bucktown, was cast to play Captain Doby, the same character Hamilton had made famous on television. By that time, Hamilton had passed away in December of 2008 at age 80, but the connection between the 2 actors remained. Fred Williamson told the Oakland Tribune that Hamilton was an extraordinary actor who never got the recognition he deserved for his work. Hamilton's performance in Bucktown showcased his range and authority, qualities that served him perfectly when he stepped into the role that would define his career. Fact 7. Inspired by a real Brooklyn bartender. The story of Bucktown didn't come from the imagination of a Hollywood screenwriter, but from a real-life incident that director Arthur Marks read about in a magazine. In an interview, published in Box magazine on October 7, 1974, Marks revealed that the screenplay was originally inspired by an article in Time magazine about a bartender in Brooklyn, Illinois, who fought back against criminal shakedowns by having a gunfight right on the streets. This true story of one man standing up against organized extortion provided the foundation for what would become Bucktown's central plot. The film takes that basic premise and expands it into a full exploration of power, corruption, and what happens when the oppressed become the oppressors. In the movie, Fred Williamson's character Duke Johnson arrives in the fictional southern town of Bucktown to bury his brother, a bar owner who was killed for refusing to pay protection money to corrupt white police officers. When Duke faces the same threats, he calls in friends from the big city to help clean up the town, but those friends eventually become just as corrupt as the original villains. This twist on the revenge story formula made Bucktown stand out from typical blaxploitation fare. While most films in the genre presented clear-cut heroes and villains, Bucktown explored the uncomfortable truth that power corrupts regardless of who holds it. The inspiration from a real Brooklyn bartender grounded the story in authentic working-class struggle, even as the film escalated into stylized action and violence. Arthur Marks understood that audiences responded to stories rooted in real experiences, even when those stories were dressed up with car chases, shootouts, and over-the-top confrontations that would never happen in real life. Fact 8. Kansas City location for river geography. Director Arthur Marks had very specific geographical requirements when scouting locations for Bucktown, and those requirements led the production to Kansas City, Missouri. In the same Box magazine interview from October 7, 1974, Marks explained that the story needed a large city that is separated by a river from a smaller city, and Kansas City provided exactly that layout. The production filmed extensively across the Kansas City area, including scenes shot on 12th Street, 9th Street, and Locust Street. Additional locations included the railroad depot in Leavenworth, Kansas, and the cemetery scenes were filmed in Platte City, Missouri. The river that separates Kansas City, Missouri from Kansas City, Kansas played an important role in the film's visual storytelling helping establish the geographical divide between the urban area where Duke Johnson comes from and the smaller southern town of Bucktown, where the main action takes place. Filming on location in Kansas City instead of on Hollywood sound stages gave Bucktown a gritty, authentic atmosphere that enhanced the story's realism. The streets, buildings, and neighborhoods of mid-1970s Kansas City became characters in the film, showing audiences what life looked like in middle American cities during that era. The production budget of just $600,000 meant that filming on location was not only artistically preferable, but also financially necessary, as building sets would have been far more expensive. The choice to shoot in Kansas City also meant the filmmakers had access to real urban environments, small-town courthouse squares, and rural areas, all within a relatively small geographical radius, making it easier to create the different settings required by the script without traveling long distances between locations. Fact 9. Continuity error with stab wounds. Bucktown contains one of those glaring continuity errors that once you notice it, you can't unsee it, and sharp-eyed viewers have been pointing it out for decades. The mistake involves the character Harley, played by Bernie Hamilton, who gets brutally attacked and stabbed multiple times during a violent confrontation in a bar. During this first beating, Harley is clearly stabbed numerous times in both his stomach and chest, wounds that would require serious medical attention and leave permanent scars. However, in a later scene, when Harley gets beaten at the bar for a second time and is dragged out of the building, his shirt rides up and viewers can clearly see his torso, completely free of any knife wounds, scars, or even bandages. It's as if the first stabbing never happened. This kind of continuity mistake was relatively common in low-budget exploitation films of the 1970s, which were produced quickly with minimal time for retakes and careful script supervision. The production schedule for Bucktown was tight, with filming beginning on September 30, 1974, and the film being released less than a year later in July of 1975. With that kind of timeline, there wasn't much opportunity to catch and fix errors during post-production. The stabbing scene was meant to demonstrate the brutality of the corrupt police force and their willingness to use extreme violence against the black community, making Harley's survival and continued participation in the story even more remarkable. But the missing wounds create an unintentional distraction that undermines the impact of what should have been a serious moment. Modern viewers watching Bucktown on streaming services or Blu-ray can easily spot this error, and it has become one of those beloved mistakes that fans of the film enjoy pointing out to newcomers. Fact 10. Tony King became Public Enemy's security chief co-star. Tony King, who played TJ in Bucktown, went on to have one of the most fascinating post-acting careers of anyone involved in the film. King appeared in over 40 blaxploitation films during the 1970s, including notable appearances in Shaft and The Godfather, where he played the only black actor in Francis Ford Coppola's gangster epic. He also had a regular role on the television series Bronx, created by Carol O'Connor and starring Jack Palance, which aired during the 1975 to 76 season. But King's life took a dramatic turn in the 1980s when he experienced a spiritual awakening that led him to the black activist community and the Nation of Islam. He converted to Islam and changed his name from Tony King to Malik Farrakhan, abandoning what he called his slave name to embrace his new identity. This transformation marked the end of his acting career and the beginning of a new chapter focused on activism and security work. Malik Farrakhan became head of security for Minister Louis Farrakhan of the Nation of Islam, and later took on the role of chief of security for the legendary hip-hop group Public Enemy, a position he held for over 20 years. In this role, he was responsible for protecting Chuck D, the founder and lead vocalist of the group, while they toured around the world. Public Enemy was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2013. With Malik Farrakhan standing alongside the group throughout their journey. In 2009, both Malik and his brother Charlie King were elected to the prestigious Pro Football Hall of Fame. Recognized for being the first African-American siblings to play professional football on the same team at the same time when they both played for the Buffalo Bills in 1966. Fact 11. Fred Williamson recycled the plot. Fred Williamson loved Bucktown so much that he couldn't resist returning to its themes and story structure 2 decades later when he made his own film. In 1996, Williamson directed and starred in Original Gangsters, a film that borrowed heavily from Bucktown's plot and even reunited him with co-star Pam Grier, along with other blaxploitation legends Jim Brown and Ron O'Neal. The story follows a former athlete who returns to his Indiana hometown after his father is murdered by a gang, and he mobilizes his old associates for vigilante justice against entrenched crime. This mirrors Bucktown's narrative about a man returning to his hometown to bury a family member, only to find the community overrun by criminals and corruption, forcing him to call in his old friends to clean up the streets. Both films explore themes of self-reliance, community uprising against external control, and the question of whether violence can truly solve systemic problems. Original Gangsters served as both a tribute to and a reimagining of the blaxploitation films that made Williamson famous in the 1970s. By bringing together so many stars from that era, Williamson created a nostalgic celebration of the genre while updating the story for a 90s audience dealing with gang violence and urban decay. The film allowed Williamson to revisit the power corrupts everyone message that made Bucktown more thoughtful than typical blaxploitation fare, but this time with the perspective of 20 additional years of life experience. Critics noted that Original Gangsters leveraged nostalgia for the era's action tropes without being a formal remake, walking the line between homage and original creation. The fact that Williamson chose to return to this story demonstrates how much the themes of Bucktown resonated with him throughout his long career in action cinema. Fact 12. Johnny Pate's funky soundtrack with Moj, UOG. The music of Bucktown stands as one of its most memorable elements, thanks to the innovative work of composer and jazz arranger Johnny Pate. Pate was already a legend in the world of funk and soul soundtracks, having previously scored Shaft in Africa and Brother on the Run, and he brought that same energy to Bucktown. His approach blended full big band arrangements with sparse, snapping instrumentals and notable use of the Moog synthesizer, an electronic instrument that was still relatively new in 1975. The soundtrack featured prominent brass sections that built tension during action sequences, propulsive rhythms with sharp brass stabs, and breakbeats that underscored high-tension pursuit scenes and funky bass lines that gave the film its urban groove. Pate's background as a jazz bassist and his work with Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions earlier in his career informed his sophisticated understanding of how to use rhythm and melody to enhance visual storytelling. The main theme and chase sequences became standouts that captured the raw intensity of the film's confrontations and territorial conflicts. Track titles like Main Theme, Chase, Love Theme, and Tank Theme reveal the variety of moods Pate created for different scenes. The soundtrack was released on vinyl by American International Records in 1975, though it never achieved mainstream chart success. Instead, it remained a cult favorite among blaxploitation soundtrack collectors and funk enthusiasts. Decades later, hip-hop producers would discover Pate's work and sample his horn loops and breakbeats, giving the music a second life in modern rap production. The Bucktown soundtrack represents the peak of 1970s funk film scoring, when composers had the freedom to create bold, groove-driven music that matched the audacity of the films themselves. Fact 13. Made on a shoestring $600,000 budget. Despite featuring major blaxploitation stars and elaborate action sequences, including an armored vehicle crashing through walls, Bucktown was produced for the remarkably small budget of just $600,000. This modest investment proved to be extremely profitable for American International Pictures, the studio that specialized in low-cost exploitation films distributed primarily to urban theaters, drive-ins, and double bills targeting black audiences. Director Arthur Marks stated in a 2012 interview that the film was a big success and made back its initial cost very quickly. According to Marks, Bucktown played in every inner-city theater in the North and was earning $60,000 to $70,000, per week just at the State Lake Theater in Chicago alone. When you consider that the entire film cost $600,000 to make, earning that much from a single theater in 1 week demonstrates just how profitable these low-budget films could be during the peak of the blaxploitation genre in the mid-1970s. The production model used by American International Pictures emphasized rapid theatrical saturation in underserved markets over national advertising campaigns, enabling quick revenue generation from repeat viewings and word of mouth in high-density urban areas. This approach made financial sense because studios could produce multiple films for the cost of one big-budget Hollywood production, and even if some failed, the successful ones more than made up for the losses. The success of Bucktown on such a small budget led to Arthur Marks developing an ongoing relationship with AIP, which distributed his subsequent films. The $600,000 budget required practical location shooting rather than expensive sets, which actually enhanced the film's gritty authenticity and street-level realism that audiences found appealing. Fact 14. Vincent Canby called it really bad. The critical reception for Bucktown was decidedly mixed, with mainstream film critics often dismissing it, while genre fans embraced it. Vincent Canby, the influential film critic for the New York Times, gave the movie one of its harshest reviews, calling it really bad and describing it as both silly and vicious. He characterized it as a foolish, rather nasty black exploitation melodrama that failed to transcend its genre conventions. However, even Canby couldn't completely dismiss the film's stars, acknowledging that Fred Williamson and Pam Grier displayed enough of their own private wit to save the movie from seeming to be quite the mess it is. He praised their animal energy, suggesting that the two performers elevated material that would have been unwatchable with lesser actors. This reflected the broader establishment skepticism toward blaxploitation films during the 1970s, with critics viewing the genre's emphasis on stylized action over narrative depth as simplistic and sensationalized rather than substantive. Other mainstream reviewers echoed similar sentiments, criticizing the film's formulaic violence and exploitative elements while grudgingly admitting that Williamson's commanding screen presence and the competent action sequences provided some entertainment value. Genre-focused critics and fans had a very different perspective, viewing Bucktown as one of the better entries in the blaxploitation canon, specifically because it complicated the typical good versus evil formula by showing that power corrupts everyone equally. The divide between critical reception and audience enthusiasm was common for blaxploitation films, which were made primarily for black urban audiences who had been underserved by Hollywood for decades and weren't particularly concerned with whether white film critics approved of the movies they enjoyed watching. Fact 15. The ending fight scene is painfully long. The climactic fight scene at the end of Bucktown has earned a notorious reputation among viewers and critics for being excessively long and brutally uncomfortable to watch. Multiple reviewers have noted that the final confrontation between Fred Williamson's Duke Johnson and the main villain drags on for so long that it becomes more disturbing than exciting, with audiences wincing rather than cheering. One critic specifically mentioned that the ending does not satisfy as much as it disturbs, with the heroic fight being so drawn out that all we can manage to do is wince in response. The fight has been described as one of the longest in blaxploitation cinema history, with some viewers joking that even the infamous alley fight between Roddy Piper and Keith David in John Carpenter's They Live doesn't compare in terms of sheer duration. The extended length of the sequence seems to have been an intentional choice by director Arthur Marks to emphasize the physical and emotional toll of violence, showing that even justified revenge comes at a painful cost. However, what may have been meant as a serious dramatic statement instead became an endurance test for audiences who found themselves checking their watches and wondering when the beating would finally end. The fight choreography itself is technically well executed with realistic-looking punches, kicks, and grappling, but the decision to let it continue for such an extended period undermines the impact by making viewers uncomfortable in a way that doesn't serve the story. Some modern fans watching Bucktown for the first time have commented that they thought the fight would never end and questioned why the editor didn't trim it down to a more manageable length. This has become one of the most discussed aspects of the film in online reviews and social media discussions.